Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into day 103 of the US-Israel-Iran conflict. And wow, it's a massive, incredibly complex, and really fast-moving story. So we're going to try and untangle all these chaotic updates from the last 24 hours. We'll do that by breaking everything down directly through the data and reports, looking at three distinct arenas: the military action, the diplomatic standstill, and the crushing economic reality on the ground.
Here is a quick roadmap to help us organize all this fast-moving data. We're going to cover the current escalation, then move to the diplomatic standoff, check in on the second front in Lebanon, and finally, look closely at Iran's economic crisis. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the current escalation, or what's basically become a massive action-reaction loop. Just to see how this tit-for-tat plays out, it really illustrates the deeply calibrated action-reaction nature of what's happening right now. Both sides are essentially trading a fresh wave of strikes. On Monday, Iran actually downs a U.S. military helicopter over the Persian Gulf. In response, overnight, the U.S. launches strikes against more than 20 Iranian targets, specifically zeroing in on air defense systems, ground control stations, and radar sites. But it doesn't end there. Also overnight, Iranian forces strike back, launching missiles at 21 U.S. military bases across the Middle East. Yet, despite all this intense firepower, reports suggest these strikes might actually be carefully calibrated by both sides to avoid crossing that threshold into an all-out, uncontrolled war. Now, to truly get why this is happening, you've got to understand the geography. The Strait of Hormuz is this highly strategic waterway, and it's serving as the absolute primary flashpoint for the current blockade, as well as the ongoing diplomatic demands. Just recently, the U.S. released footage of a strike on a tanker that was allegedly trying to move Iranian oil right through this exact strategic choke point. Controlling this strait essentially means controlling a massive portion of the world's energy supply. It is literally ground zero for the conflict. Which brings us to Section 2, the diplomatic standoff, centered around a totally stalled memorandum. There is just a massive gulf between the two sides right now, making it immediately clear why this agreement is deadlocked. The U.S. demands are incredibly steep. They want the Strait of Hormuz completely open, a long-term suspension of Iran's nuclear enrichment, which actually includes exporting 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium out of the country, and crucially, absolutely no upfront money. On the flip side, the Iranian demands are literally the exact opposite. They want the upfront unfreezing of billions of dollars in assets held in foreign banks, immediate sanctions relief, and they absolutely insist on retaining their current controls over the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, these are two totally diametrically opposed positions. And this gridlock, well, it's leading to some intense, boiling frustration. U.S. President Donald Trump stated outright that he feels Iran is taking way too long to negotiate, saying, quote, "They keep playing us for suckers." He expressed building frustration with the pace of these talks, even threatening that the United States will attack Iran again today because the Oval Office feels Tehran is simply stalling for time. But we have to remember, this isn't an isolated dispute. There is immense geopolitical spillover happening. Neighboring Gulf states are facing a very real existential and economic threat right now. Drones and missiles have targeted Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan, which has prompted Gulf Arab leaders to urgently call the Oval Office, basically pleading for a halt to the conflict. And this crisis is going totally global. Next week, France's Emmanuel Macron is hosting the G7 summit, and he has specifically invited the leaders of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, just to discuss this very crisis. It's going to be the central focus on the world stage. Okay, moving on to Section 3, the second front over in Lebanon. So, despite reports of an agreed pause in fighting between Israel and Iran on Monday, the situation on the ground in Lebanon remains incredibly violent. Israeli airstrikes killed 29 people across the country today, heavily targeting what Israeli states is Hezbollah infrastructure in regions like Tyre and Sidon. Meanwhile, Hezbollah continues its attacks on occupying Israeli troops in the south. Israel is standing firm, totally rejecting any attempts to link the conflict in Lebanon to the wider negotiations with Iran. With this level of intense, ongoing combat comes severe international scrutiny. The UN is stepping in to try and parse a highly volatile situation. The claims against Israel involve the widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure and civilian houses, as well as frequent attacks on health professionals. On the other side, the allegations against Hezbollah include utilizing civilian facilities and neighborhoods for military purposes to carry out their attacks. It is a deeply complex, messy environment that the UN investigation team is heading into next week. Finally, let's look at Section 4, Iran's economic crisis. We really need to talk about the human element of all this. Let's start with a number that is honestly just staggering: $500 million. The White House estimates that the ongoing U.S. blockade is costing Tehran $500 million every single day in lost revenue. Because as you can see, the U.S. blockade has essentially crushed Iran's primary revenue stream. Iranian oil exports plummeted from a previous capacity of 1.4 million barrels a day down to a recent 250,000 barrels a day. And currently, exports are sitting at practically zero. The money has entirely stopped flowing. To put that into human terms, consider this massive figure, 150%. Over just the past 2 months, there's been a staggering 150% inflation rate on basic food items. And we aren't talking about luxury goods here, we're talking about everyday staples like rice and yogurt. The inflation is so rampant that items like meat have basically been turned into absolute luxuries that average citizens simply cannot afford anymore. We can actually hear this desperate plea firsthand from the employees of ATA Airlines. They state, "For the past 3 months, we have not received any salaries. With the soaring cost of living, rampant inflation, and ever-increasing rents, we simply do not know how we are supposed to cope." This right here is the profound strain of an economy in absolute freefall, hitting the working class directly. And this crisis is totally systemic. The government's sheer inability to meet its payroll obligations is spreading way beyond airlines. It extends to bank employees whose wages have been completely frozen. They're earning the exact same wage they were paid 3 years ago, despite all that massive inflation we just talked about. It extends to medical university staff who are left unpaid just days before national holidays. The pressure on the Iranian government is compounding daily, raising some serious questions among observers about whether this widespread financial frustration is eventually going to spill out onto the streets. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a crucial question to consider. Will this severe economic strain on Iran force a diplomatic breakthrough at the negotiating table, or is it going to trigger further hardline escalation across the entire region? It's the central question the whole world is asking right now, and is exactly what we will be watching as the standoff develops in the coming days. Thanks for joining me, and keep questioning the data.